Hey, Ellen, how's it going?
Good. We're here to talk about the Ramshackle house. And the Ramshackle house, as it's portrayed in the video, looks like it's got three basic rooms. It's got a foundation, it's got a kitchen, and it's got executive offices upstairs.
Hmm.
Each one of those rooms relates to a part of the brain.
Hmm.
The basement of the brain, or the foundation of the brain, is the brain stem. That's called our reptile brain. And the reptile brain is basically there to sense safe or unsafe.
Hmm.
The middle part of the brain, the limbic system, I think it's like the kitchen, because the kitchen is where you cook up the chemistry that neutralifies and drives all of the processes of your life in your house, but also in your brain. All of the chemical signals that drive your entire endocrine system, how much thyroxine you make, whether your adrenals fire on time, when it's time to ovulate, when it's time to make milk for breastfeeding. All of that information, like, comes from the limbic system, comes from the hypothalamus, which reads all your body chemistry and sends signals to the pituitary, which then tells all your endocrine organs what to do, which then feeds back into the hypothalamus. So it's a constant rolling feedback loop of moment to moment decisions about body chemistry and chemical reactions, which we feel as emotions.
There it
So
is.
that limbic kitchen is an emotion generator, according to the research of Candace Pert, who discovered that opiate receptors live on almost every cell.
Mm-hmm.
So opiate receptors being a place where all kinds of things fit, but opiate fits the best because there's something about opiates because we make them. We make our own endogenous opiates, and it's part of our survival response. And we'll get into that more in chapter 2 and chapter 3 of module 1. But for now, we want to know about the place that's generating that information, which is the kitchen.
The kitchen, and the kitchen's connected to emotions.
That's called the limbic system, and it is where our emotions come from
There we go.
at its most basic, at their most chemical expression.
Yes,
Okay. Then
absolutely.
finally, we have cortex, neocortex. They're two separate spaces. We could think of the roof of the brain as the cortex and the tiles on the roof as the neocortex, right?
Excellent.
So
Excellent.
the cortex is where we can see and integrate and decide what to do with safe or unsafe. And then an emotional response to that sense of safe or unsafe. What do we actually do about it in the scope of our experience? Because we have some memories in our cortex that
Hmm.
help us, not all memories, but long term memory is in the cortex. Short term memory is in the limbic system. That long term memory is our reference library of responses to safe or unsafe. Okay, I'm having an emotional response. Okay, what am I going to do about this
Hmm.
that's going to be appropriate to the situation? And then the neocortex up here above the roof, looking down in through the tiles of the roof into the whole system, says, oh, I saw myself do that.
There it is.
Self reflection, right?
Yeah.
So this is the three-part brain. Now, I don't want the three-part brain to get confused with a triune brain. The triune brain is a concept that said these things evolved in a particular order. They did evolve in a particular order throughout the entire history of all living creatures on Earth.
Biology, yes.
They all increased and improved in size through human evolution, but there are animals that only have a brain stem. There are
Hmm.
other animals that have a brain stem and a limbic system. Then there are higher mammals, higher mammals. That means they have a larger cortex relative to their limbic system and their brain stem.
Hmm.
Dolphins, primates, my cat.
Not my cat. Well, actually, my cat's a great example because
You can
my
use
cat,
your cat as an
yeah.
example here because she's come on quite the journey, your cat.
Yeah, she has. We'll get to it when I ask you the question later about assessing the cohesion
Right,
between
right,
the
right,
distinct
right.
centers. But if I can take a moment just to pair it back to you. So, for the sake of understanding, for better understanding of neurobiology and understanding neuroanatomy, the brain, we can divide it into three distinct pieces. The brainstem, which is really oriented towards safety and survival. The limbic system, which is really oriented towards emotions. And what I've come to understand is like acceptance also and belonging, which we'll talk about in a moment.
Well,
and
that's kind of like where emotions and safety meet, right?
Exactly.
Limbic, and you know, that's a circuit.
Yes.
That comes up through the brainstem, reacts through the limbic system, and then creates some certain brainstem reactivity that then manifests as basic body function, heart rate, breathing, digestive, relationship. You know, like how much is that vagus nerve able to actually send digestion messages into the gut, etc. But not, I digress. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, because we're a social species, right? So safety and belonging, and then our like the emotional. Exactly. That we'll get to that in a second. But then the cortex, as the cortex and the neocortex, which is contained within the third distinct part of the cortex, really like learning, rational thought, meaning making, putting the pieces together, and then that neocortex is self-reflection. So just taking a moment to reflect back. That's an accurate understanding.
Yeah, that is what I would really want stream students to absorb and take into themselves about the notion of the three-part brain. And I use this image as a totem, a metaphor. And the way this came from this wonderful book called Emotional Anatomy, which I highly recommend getting a hold of. Stanley Kellerman is the author. I asked him in person on an interview if he would give me permission to use his illustrations in my course, and he granted me permission, so I use them freely. He's no longer with us, but this is such a wonderful metaphor for our evolutionary history, as well as the way our brain is organized. And somebody saw this who I was working with and immediately went out and got it tattooed on his arm. He was like, whoa, that is a heavy image. I need that on my body. I'm like, okay, great. So I gave him a video.
I love it.
Came back the next time I saw him, he had a tattoo. That's kind of awesome. But he needed that reminder of the integration of these different pieces and parts of himself to feel validated in the way he expressed himself in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
That he wasn't just all cortex tech guy. He could also have a reptilian self, and he could have a mammalian self, and that these were contained within a larger context.
Right. And for the sake of everybody watching, we won't take the, detour here into the philosophical around human exceptionalism and our alienation and discomfort with our animal nature. But I'll mention it and leave it there.
Well, right, but that's one of the reasons I love this illustration, because it's holistically inclusive of our animal nature.
It is. So now you're speaking my language. Yeah. So permission to share my screen, Ellen. And then I can share this graphic, which is from a neurodivergent independent researcher named Janae Elizabeth. And I use this graphic in addition to the beautiful one that you just shared. Sometimes I'll use this graphic expressly with my clients, but for the purpose of this video, I'm going to share it with stream students that are watching, because it's another way of looking at this three-part brain. I'm good. I think you got it?
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So just to come back to what you were saying. So this idea that the brainstem is really focused on safety. And when we were speaking earlier, you said something really powerful about this, like that it operates on either or. And I think you gave an example of a lizard that's kind of like,
yeah, sure. Lizards they kind of have two states. They have an active state and a recharge their battery state, because they're cold-blooded. They get their energy from heat. So this is why you see lizards hanging out on rocks. They're literally recharging their battery or their blood with heat. So they then have the energy to go out and do that next piece of hunting, or find their buddy, or scoot to safety if a danger of predation comes their way. They can slide under the rock, and so the owl or the hawk or whatever doesn't get them, right? They're either busy doing lizard things, or they're busy recovering from lizard things, and that's a binary state, on off.
Yep. And that's fascinating to me on a lot of levels. And so that the idea here is that the seat of sensations or neuroception is really in this area, and that the limbic system is right on top of it. And so, as you were speaking about emotions, which really oftentimes drive our behaviors or our habits or attachments, that safety and emotions are inextricable. And in this drawing, what I love that Janae points out is that because we are a social species, this is really the seat of belonging or acceptance. Mm-hmm. That this part of the brain is asking, am I loved? Am I accepted? Do I belong? And so can you speak just a little bit about how safety and belonging are connected as a result of this physiological reality?
As a social species, belonging is critical. We can't literally, especially as younger beings, we cannot survive on our own very successfully. And so we depend on the interaction of the group. Early on I've been thinking a lot about early human history and how our brain evolved concomitant with our social systems. And early on, there was a specialization between the hunter part of hunter-gatherers and the gathering part of hunter-gatherers, that language and gathering seem to feed each other, while silence and hunting seem to be necessary in order to catch the prey. You can't be having a casual conversation when you're hunting. You'll scare off your prey. Meanwhile, if you don't talk to that person whom you're gathering roots with and say, well, you can't eat that root at this season, but you can eat that root when it gets warmer. Or this seed is poisonous, but this one that looks very much like it. Do you see this one has 3 brown dots and that one has only 2 brown dots? You can eat the one with the 3 brown dots. Mm-hmm. That kind of detailed, taxonomic, specific, plant-based information had to be correct. Otherwise, you eat the wrong seed and you don't make it to make offspring, right? Yeah, if you don't catch the prey because you make too much noise, you don't make it to make offspring. So we have co-evolved with behaviors that have to do with needing to be contained in a selective, different number of roles within a social structure.
Yes.
So if we don't belong to that social structure, we're SOL. That means shit out of luck.
Yeah.
If you're shit out of luck, you're basically left by the side of the road to die. That's encoded in our nervous system, that memory. So belonging is tantamount to survival. But survival happens moment to moment. The reptilian brain is there to assess moment to moment safety. The emotional brain is there to assess whether that, okay, I made it past that near scrape that could have cost me my life. Now I can go back to belonging in the group or not. If we're traumatized, we'll have problems accepting that we belong. Accepting that we belong. And then that's going to interfere then with our cognitive ability, which is what can I learn?
What can I learn? Exactly. There's a beautiful Hopi proverb that I heard a couple years ago, and it stuck with me. And since then, have explored so many connections between our physiological reality, the psyche, how, in my work with clients, which is very much, psyche based, how this graphic can be so helpful. But really the idea here is the proverb says no learning can occur until belonging is established, essentially. And
so
the physiological reality is right here. And so that connection between safety, acceptance, and learning is critical. And what I find so interesting is too, how the vagus nerve runs 80% up and 20% down. So when I'm working with clients with this, sometimes, kind of show them this graphic. It's like when we are safe, when we feel safe, when we belong to ourselves and externally with others, we can be curious. We have this sort of really beautiful foundation to engage. And there's something about too, like playing with that formula seems to create the conditions for cohesion. Whereas if we're really oriented towards, proving or having the right answer as a starting point, if we're not feeling safe or we're not feeling accepted, or the trauma means we have stories about not being safe and not being accepted for all sorts of reasons, then it kind of goes this weird opposite way where it's like, I need to know and prove so that I can be accepted, so that I can be safe, top down, which
Mhm.
that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think we're really out of whack with it as a
Well, I
collective.
kind of think that's the nature of patriarchy,
Yes.
top down. I
Yes.
need to prove that I'm right. That's scientific reductionism, is it not?
Yes. And that's where, science is beautiful and amazing and we need it and it's great. But when it becomes dogma or when it becomes predicated, like when survival is in the mix, either I'm right or you're right. And there's this like scarcity. It's supposed to be about exploring together and using the tools of science to create consensus or reality. It's a very different thing than a penchant towards proving or needing to have the right answer. And this is relevant for stream students as practitioners because of the education piece, right? We want to be able to stand in what we know and what we don't know in our authority with clients. And so this has everything to do with our own sense of safety, our own sense of self-acceptance and belonging.
It's so interesting, Rachel, because as we transition from year one to year two, I'm asking people to contemplate application of stream in practice. And I'm watching a lot of students go into minor phases of freeze when they're like, ah, because this isn't how I learned it in school, or this flies in the face of collective understanding, or I can't do this because the yoga studio down the street has a physical therapist and they do and doulas and they do postpartum training from that perspective, and I don't know enough. And that's like, oh no, you know way more because you're actually thinking about this in
Yes.
combination with what you've learned, which is actually far more in the realm of the real than all of the facts and figures and very blinded education that people have had because of scientific reductionism.
Yes. 80 up, 20 down. We need both, but really understanding your own sense of safety and acceptance has everything to do with learning, I think, and learning in a way where we can be curious and meet others, where we can receive diversity of perspective or reception by another person, whether that's a colleague or a client. In the case you just shared, right? It's like either them or my practice is like, no, there's room for all of
There's
us.
room for all, exactly. And students, this gets to the way we talk. If we are in our reciprocity between all three levels of our functioning in the brain, we're grounded in our sense of safety. We feel held in some kind of collective community within stream and hopefully within our lives at large. Then we're free to open up our learning. And when we're learning, we're able to absorb things even that may challenge a prevailing paradigm. Stream is a challenge to the prevailing paradigm, no doubt about it. That's why people come here. They want something new and they know that it resonates, and they're not exactly sure where or why it resonates, but they know they need to be here.
Yeah.
And so this is why, because we're using all of the parts of our brain to establish coherence that will expand our ability to learn.